and welcome to Capital Insight. This is our premier program, and I hope you'll find this to be an entertaining and educational venture for you as well as for myself. I'm Kevin Mannix, and I'm a state representative in the Oregon legislature. I represent Central Salem and Northeast Salem, and we've put together a program which we hope to run from time to time to give you a chance to hear from some of the folks in and around the Capitol, the people who help make our government run, the people who help, I hope, improve our society. Our first guest today on our program is Dave Frohnmayer. He's the Attorney General of Oregon, and he is a gentleman who has been involved in public service almost his entire adult life. Our program, I should mention, is called Capital Insight. Part of this idea of Capital Insight is to give you some of the insight that I may be able to develop through conversations with other public officials and other people involved in public life. As part of Capital Insight, I'll be welcoming comments and letters from you, and I hope you will write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon 97310. And I'll mention that address from time to time just as a reminder, because we do welcome hearing from you about timely topics and timely individuals in the news. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dave Frohnmayer before we get into our discussion. And this program, by the way, is basically designed to be in a conversational format. We're just trying to relax and exchange some information and develop some new insights. Dave Frohnmayer has been Oregon's Attorney General since 1980. Before his election to statewide office, he served 3 terms in the Oregon House of Representatives, and he was a law professor and legal advisor to the President of the University of Oregon. Dave graduated magna cum laude, that means at the very top, from Harvard College, attended Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship, and received his law degree from the University of California at Berkeley. In 1988, he was awarded an honorary Doctorate of Laws degree from Willamette University. And in 1989, he received an honorary Doctorate of Public Service from the University of Portland. He's represented the state of Oregon before the United States Supreme Court, personally arguing 7 cases, the best record of any current state attorney general. Dave served as chairman of the Western Conference of Attorneys General in 1985-86. He's also served as president of the National Association of Attorneys General for 1987-88. In June 1987, Dave received that organization's prestigious Wyman Award, which is given each year to the single state attorney general who best exemplifies the goals of the office. A couple more things about Dave. In 1988, he received the nomination for a 3rd term from both parties in the state of Oregon for Attorney General. In the general election, Dave received close to 1 million votes, making him the top vote getter in the history of Oregon. A little political side note there. A Medford native, Dave currently makes his home in Eugene with his wife, Lynn, and 5 children. And so I'd like to introduce you now to Dave Frohnmayer and welcome you to our program.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Mannix, and I really do appreciate the public service that you're doing by bringing views and perspectives and new information to the wider Salem audience. That's a great idea, and I hope your program is a success.
Thanks very much. I'd like to ask a little bit about your personal background, because with political campaigns and government operations, it's so hard for the public to get a better idea of what the nature of the background of an individual is. And the thing that caught my eye more than anything else was the Rhodes Scholarship. And I happen to know a little bit about it just from my associations in the university and law school life. But could you explain to us a little bit of what the Rhodes Scholarship Program is all about?
Well, it goes back really to the very first part of the century when Cecil Rhodes, who was an imperialist by all accounts, became very wealthy, developing what used to be Rhodesia in South Africa. In fact, Rhodesia, now renamed, was named after Cecil Rhodes. But in his will, he provided for a series of scholarships to be given to Oxford University, where people from the former British colonies as well as from other nations could be brought and taught in the British university system. And it was regarded as a way of teaching and giving special impetus to people who wanted public service on a world level, perhaps even, but certainly on a local or regional level, to be part of their major part of their lives. And since that time, the scholarship has obtained, I think, justifiable prestige in view of many of the people who have held it, ranging from William Fulbright to Dean Rusk to Justice Byron White to numerous people of a wide variety of accomplishments.
You run in pretty fast company.
Well, I don't know that I'm running in the company, but I've certainly met many of them who are extraordinary. 32 of those scholarships are given each year in the United States, 4 from each of 8 regions. And I was fortunate enough to survive the competition in Oregon back in 1961 and 62. And the 2 years that I had at Oxford University in England were among the most enriching in terms of variety and breadth, and really rubbing shoulders and rubbing minds with people from all over the world. It's one of the experiences that you treasure, that nobody can ever take away from you, and that you can't fully explain, except that all of a sudden you're given 2 years to study at one of the world's most extraordinary universities in a setting where there's really no one forcing you to do anything. You essentially can do or study anything that you want, and I found that to be a very broadening experience, both in terms of the travel and the people I've met who are still lifelong friends.
Well, that's a wonderful kind of idea. I just can't imagine, I guess, at this stage of life being able to do that. But is this something that's designed mainly for younger people who are, say, just out of college?
Yes, in fact, the age limit is 24. It used to be that you couldn't be over 24 or married. Now they relaxed the rule about marriage. I was among a group of people who happily got the scholarship changed so that now women can receive Rhodes scholarships. In its beginning, of course, it was regarded just as a fellowship for men. It was a sexist kind of thing, but that was changed as a result of an act of the British Parliament that many of us encouraged back in the 1970s.
Did they have to sort of break the will or break the trust to be able to do that?
Yeah, in essence they did, and that's one of the differences between England and the United States. It would be much more difficult for our Congress to pass a law like that, because someone would say due process of law prohibits you from changing what somebody put in a will. But in England, there isn't any constitutional protection for due process, and the English Parliament simply changed the terms of that will to allow for scholarships to be given to both sexes. And I tell you, one of the things that is always a great joy to me is to sit on the Rhodes Scholarship Selection Committee, which I do from time to time, and to see these bright young men and women come in for what is probably the most intense and grueling experience of their lives, the 20 or 30-minute interview that we have. But to me, on the receiving end now, it's one of the most exciting things to see these men and women who've come out of large and small communities all throughout Oregon, and just incredibly impressive. And I keep saying to myself, I could never win that scholarship today against this kind of competition with these kids. But it really renews your faith in what kids who work hard and think deeply can do. And to have a chance to help give that opportunity to someone else always makes my year. That one day makes my year.
Well, when you talk about the Rhodes Scholarship Program, you were in England. Did you have much chance to observe government in operation at the time, or did you focus on your studies?
Oh, I focused really on everything that was going on. Of course, this is really ancient history now, because I was there between 62 and 64. I was there during what was called the Profumo scandal, in which a major aide to I think the British Defense Secretary was compromised by improper behavior, and that really caused, I think, virtually the fall of the government. At the time I was overseas, of course, there was great focus on the United States, and John Kennedy's assassination occurred while I was overseas, and that was a great wrenching blow to all of us, regardless of political party. And so we suffered at long distance through that whole transition. And of course, the Vietnam War was just beginning, just heating up at the time that I was here. So I came back. I observed a government in action in England. I participated at the fringes as an observer. And I came back to a very different country, because I'd left just as John Kennedy was beginning to hit his stride. And when I came back, America had erupted in civil rights movement issues and in war protest issues. A national leader had been assassinated. And it was a very different country to come back to. And so, you know, in a way, the re-entry was as significant as the education that I got.
Now, did you go to law school after studying at Oxford?
Yeah, I immediately entered law school at the University of California, Berkeley. And of course, that's the time at which the so-called free speech movement and student disturbances started. That was really the first indication that all was not well on the American campus, and that really the quiet generation of the 60s or the 50s had given way to a very new activist generation of the 60s. And again, that was a very both disruptive and educational part of my law school career.
Let me ask you this. How did you find yourself in terms of that spectrum of political opinion at the time? Were you on the sidelines or were you involved? And what was your viewpoint on things?
Well, in my viewpoint, the university had made a terrible mistake in denying very legitimate rights of free speech to a wide variety of people, and subsequently all of that was vindicated. A court today would hold without hesitation that the students who wanted to set up a little table and distribute literature had the right to do that because it was public property and a public forum, and they really weren't disturbing anybody. And in fact, I wrote a major piece of scholarship as part of my legal work on a repressive law that was passed by the California Assembly that would have, I think, clearly violated our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. But what I didn't do was engage in the sit-ins and the illegal behavior. And I still have a problem with the issue of civil disobedience. That's one of the great, as you know, quandaries that someone has when they are protesting something that they don't like. Should they go ahead and break the law? I couldn't do that. I didn't want to do that. I felt that was not appropriate as a way of protesting what I thought the administration had done wrong.
Philosophically, wouldn't it be fair to say that in a society as democratic as ours, with so many opportunities for people to have their views heard and effected, carried out, isn't civil disobedience really just about beyond the pale of what a truly democratic society has a right to expect most of the time? I guess I better qualify that, because I'm not criticizing civil disobedience in the South, where blacks were excluded from participation in the democratic process. We had a democratic facade in government where blacks were not participating, and I can understand where they would have had a right perhaps to engage in civil disobedience because they had no access to the system. And you might want to address that. But generally speaking, in our society, isn't civil disobedience something that's a bit beyond the pale?
Well, I think it's the utter last resort. I mean, I think it has to be used as the ultimate weapon only after everything else fails. And one other point needs to accompany that. I mean, that is that you have to exhaust all of the legally available avenues that you have. And in this society, we have many of them. The other point about civil disobedience, at least in most circumstances, is you have to be prepared to take the consequences. I mean, if you're going to make a moral statement and say, I'm going to violate the law, then you better be prepared to go to jail. Now, there's societies that I think are so evil that an act of civil disobedience is an act of moral courage. For example, a judge who would defy Nazi Germany law, for example, which was, that would be an act of civil disobedience in a radically different context. But in our society, I think you have to be prepared to pay the consequences if you're going to disrupt the lives of other people by your act of protest that goes beyond the other easily available channels of persuasion.
In our society, when we talk about civil disobedience, maybe we should qualify that. We're really talking about refusing to obey a law. We're not talking about violence, are we?
Well, some people may think that violence can be a form of civil disobedience. Normally, you think of it as more passive action, you know, chaining yourself to a public building or something of that kind that ultimately violates a trespass law. That's passive behavior. But civil disobedience also, I suppose, could be resisting arrest. In either case, it does violate a law.
I'd like to mention to our viewers again and our listening audience for a moment that you are listening or watching a program called Capital Insight. Capital Insight is hosted by myself, Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and it's designed to give members of the public an opportunity to hear a little more casually but in depth from public officials and leaders involved in our community on a variety of topics. We are trying to have a free-flowing conversation about some things and get a little background information on people. This is our premier program. If you have any questions or concerns that you'd like to have addressed in state government, please feel free to write me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon 97310. And now I'd like to return to our guest, Dave Frohnmayer, Attorney General of Oregon. Dave, we were talking a little bit about civil disobedience, but I'd like to shift now to talk about your background in the state legislature, because I know you served 3 terms in the House of Representatives. How was that experience for you?
Well, that was one of the most creative times of my life, really. I served in the legislature in the 1975, 77, and 79 sessions. That probably sounds like ancient history now, but it was, I was in my middle to late 30s. It was an enervating time. It was a chance really to prove that an individual can make a difference. I mean, I've always believed that about the Oregon system, and that's why we're so different than so many other states, is because sure, there are special interest groups, sure, there are powerful political action committees, but time and again I've seen one legislator or one citizen lobbyist or one neighborhood association go in and make a huge impact. It can change a whole law or a whole structure of laws, and it may take more than one session, but you can get things done here. And that was my experience in the Oregon legislature. I was always in the minority party. I know you, Representative Mannix, have been both in the majority party and the minority party, and I'm sure you have reflections on the difference between the two. But in essence, I was always kind of looking for crumbs from the king's table, as it were, as the minority party usually does. But found even as a member of a minority party, I had friends on both sides of the aisle. I've never been a supercharged partisan. And as a consequence, I really felt that I could get things done. Legislative reform was one of my big issues. I was a major proponent of open government, of changes in our ethics laws and lobby disclosure laws. And on the Judiciary Committee, which hears about, as you know, because you are a member of that committee, about 15% of all the legislation that passes goes through the Judiciary Committee. So you really see a whole perspective on Oregon. You see how diverse this state is, how diverse the interests are. Despite our common unity and our great love for the state of Oregon, people in the state live very differently. People from Paisley and Plush have a different viewpoint than those from Portland. And it's important too, and I think a state legislator has the great opportunity to see people from all corners of this state, from every industry or economic sector of this state. And that's an education that you can't get anyplace else other than serving. So I found it very rewarding period of time. By the end of my third term, it was time to move on to decide whether I wanted public service in a much more intense dose by running for Attorney General. But I'm very glad of that experience as a lawmaker.
Let me pause at that point, because I wanted to go back a little bit here. And at some point in this process, you were starting to gather together a family. And I know you have a wife, Lynn, and 5 kids. How did your professional and personal life intermingle with your political life while you were in the legislature? And how are things going for you then?
Well, actually, they were going quite well. I live in Eugene, lived then in Eugene, and still do. That's on the outer edge of to coin a term, commutability. And essentially, I did it all 3 ways. My first session, we moved to Salem, and we lived in an apartment. And the kid, I just had 2 kids in. They were very young, and Lynn helped take care of the kids, and as often as she could would come down and join me at the Capitol. The second session, she had a job of significant responsibility, helping to protect children. And again, we still had our 2 kids. So the first half of the session, I moved up and commuted back, and then the second half, she moved up. And by the third session, I got a room with a friend and would come up a couple times and stay overnight, but would commute back and forth. And that was compatible with the family, because we still have, and I still hope we keep, a citizen legislature. So 6 months out of every 2 years is a disruption, but it's not significant. Our third child came along just about the time of our third term. And then that's all the kids we thought we would have. Subsequent to that time, as you may know, our 2 daughters were diagnosed with a very deadly hereditary disease. And our whole family life has really changed. We have 2 more children, but the problem of working in a full-time job away from where you live and doing justice to your family is one of those balancing acts that everybody who's in public life has to do. And that's the part that the people on the outside don't necessarily see. I had a very interesting experience last night when I spoke to a group of 400 youngsters at Boys State. And one of them asked a very polite, almost touching question. He says, "We see you, on television, read about your office on the radio, hear your pronouncements, but," he said, "all of a sudden I saw you one day with your daughter." And he said, "That made me realize that you have a family." Then he said, "What makes you tick?" And of course you have to put yourself instantly on the psychoanalyst's couch and try to tell people this candidly and honestly about it. But in fact, I do have a family life. In fact, I do believe that my family, and what my family before me, my parents, have given me, is the single most valuable strength or set of strengths that I can have. And all people in public life struggle to make that balance between what they can give to their kids and what they need to give to their kids, their spouses, and their drive to do something beyond themselves that contributes to their community. And unfortunately, I think for all of us in public life, we want to reserve some zone of privacy for our families and for our relationship to them. And so that doesn't really ever come out. And people, whether they're watching this program or listening to it, probably wonder, you know, what is behind us? What makes us tick? And the answer I'd give is, you know, they're a very important part of that fuel that keeps you going is the family you care about and the state and the future you want to build for them.
People would be surprised sometimes at the super politician who then goes home and does the dishes, or if they have young kids, changes diapers or whatever else. I still find people that are amazed at when they run into me away from my legal life and my political life. And I think about, what was I doing last evening? Playing with the kids? Yes, cleaning up after dinner. People sometimes forget that politicians are also people, real people.
Yeah, you know, that's one of the interesting things that actually one of the quiet enjoyments that I have. As soon as I get home, you know, I get into a pair of old trousers or whatever, and I may well go to the drugstore to pick up some sundries, or the grocery store to shop, or take my kids along with me just to give my wife some breathing room to do what she needs to do. And I'll bump into people, and they'll be shocked that I'm pushing a supermarket basket, because they assume that my chauffeur will be doing that. And then they're even more shocked when they see me get up in an old beat-up 1980 car, because they assume that I have a state-provided limousine. I don't have any of that thing. I don't need those trappings. And in fact, I think one of the most important things about the citizen legislature is what you've described, and one of the most important things about being a public official is what I'm trying to describe, and that is that you got to get out there and live under the laws that you pass or that you interpret if you're going to be an effective lawmaker or law interpreter. And to have a permanent government that is so removed from the people whose lives we affect that we can't even go to a supermarket, that's going to remove you from a very important part of reality. I get some of my best feedback in the checkout lines from people. I get some of my best feedback when I go in and get a cup of coffee at the Pioneer Villa down here at Brownsville, where I stop for coffee just to go in and get it every morning. And I can tell from the guys and the gals there whether they like what I'm doing or not, because they have expressed their opinion in no uncertain terms. But you know, if you're so insulated, or if the public thinks you're so insulated, that you don't have a family, that you don't drive a car, that you don't have the problems making sure your kids get what you think they need, then they're only seeing half of you, and then we're not getting back in return from the public the sense of full dimension that we have, I hope.
Well, I'm hoping that this show, Capital Insight, will give you folks some chance to get a better idea of what politicians are really all about, for better or for worse. And I'll remind folks that this is Capital Insight. It's our premier program with our Attorney General, Dave Frohnmayer. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix, your host for the program. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to address them to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And I'd like to return now to our guest, Dave Frohnmayer, and shift a little bit again to the Office of the Attorney General. And we talk about misperceptions of politicians, whether or not they're really people or not. A lot of people seem to think of the Attorney General as simply the top cop in the state. Can you give us some idea what your office is really all about?
Sure, and I'd preface it, Representative Mannix, by saying that the Office of Attorney General is one of the most powerful and least understood offices, not merely in Oregon, but throughout the United States. It's always been so. I can go on the circuit and tell people 365 days a year, it is not the top police office of Oregon. That's the job of the Oregon State Police, Oregon's district attorneys, Oregon's elected sheriffs, and folks still won't quite get it. We do engage in the criminal law business. We do take all of the appeals. When people appeal a conviction, we handle the state's case.
I used to do that. I worked in the appellate unit years back.
Right, and you know now that even when you had a busy workload then, we have 2,000 cases a year, people who are justifiably convicted, we believe, and we're trying to keep in prison. They feel that they're unjustifiably convicted and want to be out. It's a big caseload, but that's at the appeals level. We do, on very selected occasions, conduct investigations that have criminal law consequences, particularly if they involve malfeasance in office or public corruption. Very sensitive cases, ones that sometimes create enormous resentment by other politicians against our office, because sometimes we investigate and many times we find that there's no wrongdoing. But that overall part is a pretty small plate on the total menu of the office. Mostly we provide legal representation to all the state government. We try to make sure that state government in its totality doesn't violate citizens' rights. When you're in session in the legislature, as you know, we may provide dozens, if not hundreds, of opinions, either orally or in writing, to legislators about the implications of the bills that they're passing. Are they constitutional? Are there technical problems that would constitute a major glitch or create a major problem for a person? Probably 30% of my staff is over simply as technical resources to legislative committees at one time or another in the session. Not necessarily to advocate bills, we do that too, but to provide advice about the implications of laws that are being considered. We advise everyone from the governor right down to a clerk in the Department of Energy, if they so request our opinion. And our overall objective is to be the state's chief legal officer. That's how the statute describes me, not as the state's top law enforcement officer, but the state's chief legal officer. So while we have a chunk of the criminal law, we do a lot more. And in the long run, that other part is a lot more significant probably for whether or not we have a government of laws in this state and government of rule of law than anything else that we do.
But you also have a consumer protection operation, as I understand it.
We have a very significant consumer protection operation. We get 1,500 consumer complaints a month. We have 4 full-time people who are working those telephone lines from 9 to 1. Then the telephone lines shut off because they have to process the cases that they've taken in. And it goes everywhere from whether or not warranties apply to used cars, to mail-order goods that were unwanted, to more recently and more significantly perhaps cable television, TCI's negative option offer to give the encore service and charge people for it without their specific consent. To major litigation we've had against the oil companies for alleged overcharges of gasoline or petroleum products. So the consumer protection part has really been something that's contributed to the activism of the Office of Attorney General in recent years.
Now, I'd like to shift quickly, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, to ask you about your role in terms of the legislature, and you have mentioned that already. But in terms of advocacy, did you have some sort of a program coming into this latest session, the 91 session?
Yeah, we typically do have a program. I mean, in addition just to assisting legislators with their ideas or assisting agencies explaining the legal aspects of their bills before the legislature, we also have our own program. We're very hopeful to get a DNA bank. That's a technical term for enabling police to use the genetic fingerprints of a person, which are practically irrefutable evidence, particularly in the commission of sex crimes.
And that's for identification of the suspect.
Of rape perpetrators, and also it clears some people who are suspected. So it has aspects that protect liberties. We have a major package of reforms in child support. We have a major package of concerns in victims' compensation, because we also administer that program for people who are the innocent victims of crime, who are out-of-pocket money, incur losses. We have a significant set of bills relating to the powers of the Attorney General, very controversial, but we can't have an effective Office of Attorney General without the kinds of things such as subpoena power that you would expect an office of our investigative jurisdiction to have.
Have things been flowing pretty smoothly for you? Of course, some folks may be hearing from us as the session is over, and we're talking right now as the session is heading towards conclusion. Yeah. Well, but how's it gone?
As we're heading to the final session, I still don't have a budget yet, so that final bottom line return isn't in. We've obviously had to pare back in terms of what we think is necessary to meet the workload. That's an aspect of Measure 5. We understand that our lumps go just like anybody else's do. Our child support legislation has been very successful. The jury is still out on whether our victims' compensation program is one that we can afford, and that's something that we're working on as we speak.
Well, I've been trying real hard to be of help to you in those areas.
And we appreciate it. You've been very bipartisan in that support, Representative Mannix, and we're grateful for it.
Well, glad to be of help. I'm going to mention to our viewers again that you've been watching or listening to the premiere edition of Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix, and I've been pleased to be your host for this program. Our guest today has been our Attorney General, Dave Frohnmayer. And again, if you have any questions or concerns that you'd like to address to me as a state representative, you can write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. I hope that you find this program is refreshing, entertaining, sometimes quiet, sometimes noisy. We'll see how it goes. But especially I want to give you some insight into what our public officials do and how they think. Thank you very much for joining us today.